Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games. Thanks for joining us today as we reveal Path of Exile's next expansion, Sentinel, which launches on PC and Mac on May 13th, and on Xbox and PlayStation on May 18th. Twitch drops are enabled for today's live stream, so make sure you follow the instructions below to link your account and earn your Rapture wings. In February, we launched Siege of the Atlas, an expansion that drastically changed Path of Exile's mapping endgame. It removed Atlas regions and watchstones and introduced the gigantic Atlas-wide passive tree and 4 new pinnacle bosses to challenge. One other very important aspect of the new endgame is its modularity. We designed it in a way where it's easy to expand with more content, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Alongside the Sentinel Challenge League, this expansion doubles down on the best parts of Siege of the Atlas to give you ultimate control over your endgame experience.
Ještě bude specializovanější Atlas?
Sentinel trailer, Sentinel Atlas, blah blah blah. We'll start with a trailer for the Sentinel expansion, and then we'll go through its
revamped monster modifiers zase.
Starting with how the new Sentinel Challenge League lets you control your level of risk and reward. We'll then move on to the improvements we've made to Path of Exile's endgame. We'll discuss modifications to the Atlas-wide passive tree,
ten endgame improvements jsou velmi dobrý.
Atlas keystone passives, new variations on pinnacle boss fights, and powerful unique items designed by the winners of our Siege of the Atlas boss kill event. Following that, we'll discuss the type of balance changes we're making, or more interestingly, not making in this expansion. We'll then cover what we're doing with modifiers, various quality of life improvements, and the full release of controller support for PC players. After showing you our latest supporter packs, I'll head into a live Q&A with community streamer Ziggy D, where we'll answer your questions. Once that finishes, we'll post the expansion's full patch notes. There's a lot to cover, so let's roll the trailer for Sentinel.
Tak to možná bude moc nahlas. Schválně. Co tam uvidíme?
In the wake of your power, something has arisen. Dark sentinels, hungry for a share.
To budou nepřátelé asi.
But these cruel constructs can be harnessed. Take them, bind them to your will.
Ne, takže to budou naše buffy.
Test and
ano. Stromy. A tohle je syntesizování.
Together, you will find your fortune. Some sentinels are powerful. Others are dangerous. But in a world with shifting stars,
jsou tam keystony, já to věděl.
Monstrous new threats.
Super. Uber pinnacle bosses.
Treasures.
Hodně nových předmětů. Nový uniky. Uber Sirus? To je 6ramenný Uber Sirus?
The sentinels await your command.
6ramenný Uber Sirus, dělal jsem dobře? Tak to mám víc nahlas.
I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so let's get started with a full explanation of the upcoming Sentinel Challenge League. Sentinels are ancient constructs that have been unearthed across Reakce. In this league, you will collect these sentinels and attempt to harness their great power. But this symbiosis is not without risks. Once deployed, a sentinel follows you, watching and waiting for you to enter combat. As you encounter enemies, the sentinel will fire a beam that doesn't damage the enemy, but rather empowers them. This not only amplifies the difficulty of the foe, but also the rewards that it yields. There are 3 classes of sentinels that you will find as you kill monsters in this league. Stalker sentinels will follow you for around 30 seconds, empowering dozens of monsters before they dissipate. This is like a build your own breach or delirium effect, because you control what monsters you're fighting when you deploy the sentinel, and through various means that we'll describe shortly, you're also in control of how much the monsters are empowered. In contrast to Stalker sentinels, Pandemonium sentinels are designed for mass area of effect, and typically only fire 1 shot. But this shot really counts, chaining between monsters to affect an entire screen full of foes at once. This class of sentinel can be very dangerous because it empowers so many enemies at one time. The final class, Apex Sentinels, can only empower rare or unique enemies. They fire fewer shots but have a much larger impact on difficulty and reward.
Jsou zase antimarky.
You start with a single slot to equip a Stalker Sentinel, but as you play through the league, you can eventually unlock 2 more Sentinel slots so that you can have 1 Sentinel of each class equipped at a time. Each class of Sentinel can be deployed only once per area that you play. You'll quickly develop various strategies for when each class of Sentinel is best used.
For example,
saving your Pandemonium Sentinel for when you're surrounded by monsters, or using your Apex Sentinel on the map boss or league content that spawns several rare monsters. With a full loadout of Sentinels equipped, in every map you'll get to empower bosses of your choice, juice up an entire screen at once with a button press, and choose the part of the map where it's best to empower a series of dozens of monsters. Sentinels cannot be damaged by monsters in combat, but do gradually deplete their internal power supply each time you use them. They can be found as you play and are incompatible with traditional Ray-class crafting techniques. However, new Sentinels with different properties can be assembled from the depleted husks of others that you have used until their internal power supplies ran out. We'll explain that crafting process in more detail.
To znamená, že možná to bude craftovatelný. Jo!
You can find magic Sentinels that have mods on.
Ano, craftovatelný.
These mods can augment the base properties of a Sentinel, extending its duration, making it empower monsters faster, increasing the number it can empower, or even the degree to which the monsters are empowered, affecting both their difficulty and rewards.
Co to je 8 a 10?
Some mods will add specific drops such as currency items, essences, or unique items to monsters empowered by the Sentinel, but at the cost of increasing how difficult the monster is to defeat.
Trošičku se bojím, aby to nebylo zase moc klikání.
You can also occasionally find rare Sentinels that have more than 2 mods on them. These
are generally quite a lot more powerful than
normal magic Sentinels if you find the right combination of mods.
221 000 lidí kouká.
The Sentinels you find as you explore Ray-class will become more powerful.
Some
particularly powerful ones with special properties can only come from the process of assembling new Sentinels from depleted ones.
Bude tam taky nějaký strom na vytváření
těch
Sentinel.
Sentinels you find generally get better and better as you play through the league. You can also upgrade the behavior and properties of Sentinels through your Sentinel controller. The Sentinel controller is like a runic circuit board. It's what powers your Sentinels and allows you to customize them. There are specific nodes for each of the 3 types of Sentinel, so you can customize the properties and behavior of all of them, or potentially focus on your favorite base types. As you play through the league and kill more and more enemies affected by your Sentinels, your controller will gain power. You start with 4 units, which is enough to power your first Sentinel slot and your first runic node. By the end game, you are able to work up to 30 power units, which is enough for almost half of the controller to be powered at once. So how do you choose which runic nodes to power? You do this by connecting them together with filaments. Power flows from the top of the circuit through the filaments until it is all in use by the nodes you have connected. You can set up filaments in advance and they'll automatically be used as more power becomes available. Moving filaments around is no cost. It's basically like a planning tool that gradually gets activated as you gain more power throughout the league. So you're not locked into a specific plan and you can respec for free at any time. Some powerful runic nodes require 2 filaments and hence allocate more of your power when activated. Additional Sentinel slots, prototypes like Pandemonium and Apex Sentinels, for example, require 3 filaments and hence 3 power units each. While it's almost always best to have all 3 slots powered so you can use all 3 Sentinels per area, there are niche strategies where you want to unpower specific Sentinel slots in order to have more power for additional runic nodes, also that you can fully specialize in just 1 or 2 Sentinel types. Just to reiterate, you can change your allocation as much as you like, so feel free to experiment.
Je to úplně zadarmo, nejsou žádný respect pointy.
This powerful runic node allows Pandemonium Sentinels to be used an additional time each area. While this is basically pure upside, you should definitely plan around the fact that you'll be running their charge down pretty quickly if you use this node. This runic node prevents your Stalker Sentinels from empowering normal rarity enemies. While this seems very powerful at first because you'll just be empowering magic, rare, or unique enemies that benefit greatly from the boost to item drops, you should be aware that unless you have a large source of special enemies, you'll be fighting against the flight duration of your Sentinels and will probably want to build around increasing their duration. While the Sentinel controller lets you specialize how the different classes of Sentinels behave, it's generally not necessary to have to modify it for each new Sentinel that you equip. The runic nodes you have chosen represent your overall strategy for each class of Sentinel and rarely need to be tweaked if you swap one Sentinel for another. As you use Sentinels in combat across a number of maps, they eventually run out of charge and will become depleted, but they don't need to be thrown away when this occurs. you can find power cores that let you assemble a new Sentinel with a full charge. This process disassembles two existing Sentinels and creates a hybrid of the two, with their properties combined together.
syntéza.
Right-clicking a power core opens up an assembly screen. If you insert two Sentinels and click the assemble button, a new fully charged one will be created.
A nevíme co, neboli bude nějaká tabulka, co z toho vznikne. Je úplně totéž to synthesis, úplně totéž. Je tady pomalý tohleto, neboli to, tam je takový gamblerský.
This process is a complex and unpredictable one that can either inherit properties from the input Sentinels or potentially produce new ones that weren't based on either of them. For example, the base type of the Sentinel could either be the left input Sentinel, the right input Sentinel, or an entirely new one that can't spawn naturally and can only come from this process.
Takže něco úplně speciálního z toho může vzniknout.
The same applies to its modifiers. You generally get a mix of modifiers from the two input Sentinels, but sometimes they have their tiers upgraded or entirely new mods added, occasionally including ones that are exclusive to the assembly process. The end result is that you're usually getting Sentinels that are similar in function to the depleted ones you have combined, but occasionally mutate in new ways, producing results that unlock more power and possibilities. The best Sentinels in the game will come from lucky combinations of depleted Sentinels that have just the right mods. It's also possible to assemble two Sentinels directly into one of the many valuable unique Sentinels.
Unique Sentinel. Destroyed on empowering map quantity effects rewards.
Specialized power cores exist, which influence the assembly process to greatly increase the chances of various interesting outcomes occurring. They don't guarantee anything, but are absolutely worth considering if you're trying to hit unlikely assembly results.
Upgrading tiers.
You may want to accumulate a small collection of depleted Sentinels so that you have options to assemble together. That's where the Sentinel Locker comes in. It's a free object that you can place in your hideout that allows you to store stacks of each of the Sentinel
currency items, můžete těšit na video, jak dát Sentinel Locker do hideoutu.
You can also store Sentinels in regular stash tabs, and they can be freely traded with other players.
Sentinely jsou tradovatelné, to je důležité.
Sentinels will also work with regular stash tabs while
bude
this
kolem
league
nich
is active.
ekonomika.
As I hinted at before, you can find or create unique Sentinels. These have powerful static properties, but because they cannot be combined with other Sentinels, there's no way to recharge them once they become depleted. They are essentially limited use items with powerful effects. Let's look at a few
Hollow-eyed
examples.
Skull, Ivory
First
Stalker
off, we
Sentinel.
have the Basilisk. This is a Pandemonium Sentinel that augments its wide area of effect blast with a petrification effect. Any monsters caught in the blast are turned to stone. Rather than being primarily useful for raising the risk and reward of combat like other Sentinels, this one is incredibly useful as an emergency button in combat. By activating the Basilisk, you can freeze most of the monsters around you in place, letting you take control of dangerous situations.
Noobové anebo v hardcoreu. Tohle to nikdo nebude používat.
This unique Sentinel, the Hollow-eyed Skull, is basically a headhunter in Sentinel form.
To znamená,
There
budeme
are
to
also a
krást
set
věci.
of unique Sentinels that are designed to empower specific named Atlas map bosses. If you activate one of these Sentinels while fighting that boss, it empowers the boss into an extremely dangerous version that is very, very rewarding if you can
To
defeat it.
znamená, že naprostá většina z nich bude na
highly
nic,
empowered boss
protože
fight is further
ty mapy
scaled by
nikdo
whatever
nehraje.
mods are on the map that contain it, so you'll want to be pretty careful with what mods you choose to use. On the other hand, its rewards are scaled by reward bonuses on that map, so if you're able to defeat one of these bosses in a juiced map, you will certainly be greatly rewarded.
Co to je ten Divine Orb, co to má za barvu?
These highly empowered map bosses are the best source of recombinators, a new type of endgame currency item that can be found in the Sentinel League. Recombinators allow you to apply the Sentinel assembly process to two pieces of equipment of the same item class, combining them together in unpredictable ways.
Takže
This
to je
process can also
syntéza,
rarely
ale
view your items with
předmětu.
exclusive modifiers that don't normally spawn on that type of item.
S úplně novejma
While the
modama.
recombination process involves significant risks, you could combine the best parts of two rare items together, maybe getting a lucky exclusive mod spawn, and end up with one of the best weapons, armor pieces, or jewelry in Path of Exile.
Synthesis.
Sentinels can be deployed while engaging in other League content, so you can juice the risk and reward to quite crazy levels. For example, you could enter a Mirror of Delirium, trigger a breach, and deploy your Sentinel at the same time, causing the monsters to have 3 significant modifiers to both their difficulty and rewards. There are only a few specific areas that Sentinels can't be deployed in, mostly for technical reasons, and those are unique maps, pinnacle Atlas bosses, and the Simulacrum.
Takže funguje to téměř všude.
So that's Sentinel in a nutshell. It's a combat league that gives you heaps of control over the exact risk and reward you encounter. It stacks with other combat-enhancing league mechanics, juices your endgame bosses beyond any kind of reasonable difficulty, lets you play with temporary headhunters, and might even let a few players assemble some pretty insane rare items if they're lucky.
Rozhodně mě nejvíc zajímá ta kombinace těch předmětů.
In addition to the Sentinel Challenge League, this expansion further improves on the new endgame introduced in Siege of the Atlas. Its Atlas-wide passive tree and pinnacle boss fights. The new endgame was designed to give you ultimate control over what kind of content you want to play and how difficult and rewarding you want it to be. With the Sentinel expansion, we are doubling down on what makes this new endgame the best one that Path of Exile has ever had.
Skill tree.
This expansion introduces 20 powerful keystone passives to the Atlas tree.
Přesně jsem doufal, že se to
As you know from the regular passive skill tree, keystone passives are usually dramatic and build changing, with both upsides and potential downsides. Each keystone can completely change the way you play Path of Exile's endgame. We have designed keystone passives for many different playstyles and situations. The second big change is that we have introduced these clusters of passives that grant you even more control over what endgame content you encounter. As you know, you can encounter many different types
takže si můžete smazat nějaký obsah, který nemáte rádi, a místo toho budete mít specializace na něco jiného. To je hodně dobrý. To je hodně dobrý. To je hodně dobrý.
Aside from the obvious convenience of only encountering the past league mechanics that you choose, the system is great for target farming specific content that you have juiced on your Atlas tree.
Takže nevím, jestli můžete vidět všecko.
We have created incredibly difficult and rewarding uber versions of 7 pinnacle boss fights, which can be accessed via 6 new keystone passives. These fights are designed to challenge the absolute best Path of Exile players, and suffice to say, they are brutally difficult. Let's take a look at some of the new keystones and boss fights.
Šíleně těžké věci.
The singular focus keystone makes it significantly more likely that your favored maps will drop. If a map drops that is not one of your favorite maps, it will be converted into a random currency item. This means that you'll exclusively see your favorite maps, and outside of that, more currency. This is the realization of the I only want to play one map dream that some players have. It also helps players who are over-sustaining maps and would rather just get extra currency items.
Ano.
The Stream of Consciousness keystone prevents you from modifying your maps with fragments or scarabs, but means that when extra content is being rolled for your maps, each of the base chances is 50% higher. This is really useful for players who don't want to have to think about juicing their maps and would instead prefer to get a constant
Kdo nepoužívá skaraby, tak pro něj je tohleto
The following 2 keystones are for very advanced players who have completed their Atlas trees and want to get a very specific outcome with all of their skill points. The Wandering Path keystone increases the effect of small passives on your Atlas skill tree and disables all notable passives.
Je to zajímavý, ale
the Grand Design keystone increases the monster pack size in each of your maps by an amount proportional to the number of notable passives you have allocated. However, the trade-off is that small passives have no effect.
Čekaj, to jsem taky nestihnul přečíst. To jsou podle mě brutálně silné věci.
These 2 keystones are very good for specializing into maximizing pack size and quantity at the
expense of
specific
úplně jako empiriánská skupina, toho bude hrát nekonečno těchto věcí. Právě, super.
The Twist of Fate keystone changes the behavior of corrupted rare maps in unpredictable ways. Upon entering a map, you may be sent to an alternative map of the same tier with randomized modifiers. All of the master missions, scarabs, and Kirit crafts applied to the map will also be randomized. This process will not pick an outcome that was already on the map, so it always shifts it to a new property that you didn't have before. This means that you can play all of the scarabs, master missions, and maps that you enjoy, and any leftover ones can be randomized to new outcomes, which are guaranteed to not be the ones you started with. This may have some interesting economic consequences as well, with players feeding bad scarabs or maps into the Twist of Fate lottery.
No a je to pěkně na protože budete hrát náhodný mapy.
To není moc dobrý. Change the ratios of monster life and damage in maps on the Atlas, so that they are more dangerous and less tanky, or vice versa.
More life.
These 2 keystones are designed to be remedial, allowing players with an abundance of offense or defense to normalize themselves so they can handle the content better.
More damage, less life je ideální pro mě.
If you find yourself in a situation where you're waiting for a weapon upgrade or can't fix your resistances, then you could allocate one of these keystones to temporarily make things easier, before unallocating it later when your build is complete.
Super, to je super.
6 new keystones create uber versions of Path of Exile's pinnacle boss fights.
Maven,
Benarius, Cyrus, the Maven, the Searing Exarch, the Isha of Worlds, and the Shaper and Uber Elder, who I guess is now called the Uber Elder.
Právě jsem to chtěl říct, to je Uber Elder.
Allocating one of these keystones on your Atlas passive tree ramps up the corresponding boss fights that is extremely difficult, like really hard, harder than saying goodbye to Zana hard. Only allocate these keystones if your character is extremely powerful and you know you can handle the challenge. In general, the encounter's rules are modified to be far more punitive and difficult. In return, though, you can earn some very enticing rewards.
Tohle to vypadá, že jsou plus
Each of the Uber
2
fights has an
projektily.
additional high chance reward and a chance of getting a very, very rare chase reward. For example, the Uber Maven guarantees an elevated sextant if you're able to complete the encounter. Very rarely, though, you may be able to earn an awakened exceptional support gem as well, such as Empower, Enlighten, or Enhance.
Awaken, Enlighten?
These keystones unlock crazy battles that will challenge our most aspiring players who are deep in Path of Exile's endgame. They add a new level of difficulty for those who want to push their builds even farther than they ever have before.
What?
The keystones we have shown you so far are designed around many different types of endgame players. Some glass cannon players struggle with defenses but have no problem with offense. Some players want to just play one map. Some players want the difficulties to be ramped up and to receive rewards commensurate with this added challenge. The keystones also let you identify a specific reward, type of content, or playstyle and know exactly how you can get the most out of it. There are a number of other new keystones that we'll reveal before release. Like the ones we have shown you today, these keystones require you to consider your endgame plan in an entirely new light.
Ještě všechny keystony se nedozvíme dneska, ale budou je postupně dávkovat před začátkem ligy, aby dělali hype.
Before we get into the new unique items, there are a few other endgame Atlas changes that we should cover. We are removing Vinctar's Square and Doryani's Machinarium from the Atlas of Worlds because they are not natural map drops. You can still get and play these maps, of course, but they aren't counted for your overall Atlas completion anymore. The Atlas passive points have been moved to rewards for defeating the Infinite Hunger and the Black Star. We have rebalanced influence altars and maps. They now feel a lot different than they did
Divination
before they were introduced in Siege of the Atlas. Their downsides now feel more impactful and they have more diversity of rewards, including new rewards. The intention is to fulfill the original design goal of having an ultimatum-like choice about whether you want to accept additional challenge for additional reward.
Bude to brutálnější, ale budou lepší
odměny. Tree support for them, including 2 keystones that can affect them.
Bude Atlas Strina,
We've also rebalanced the drop weightings of the new Pinnacle Atlas bosses, changing the relative drop weightings of their unique rewards and making them more likely to drop Eldritch currency.
Ano. Budou přebalancovaný pravděpodobnosti.
Elder and Shaper Scarabs are basically worthless because their influence is worse than the free influence you can get from the Eater of Worlds and the Searing Exarch. In Sentinel, you can now apply multiple types of influence to one map, so you could have Eater of Worlds influence alongside a Shaper or Elder Scarab on a Conqueror map. Together, these 3 influences combined have a very large effect on that map, and this will make Elder and Shaper Scarab significantly more desirable.
To je super, že to začne fungovat, že to nebude nulovat.
The start point of encountering Shaper, Elder, or Conqueror influence and influence items has been raised to level 81 areas. We've also fixed an issue that was causing some players to skip playing most of the contents of maps. On the lower half of the Atlas passive tree, there were a lot of small skills that granted a 2% chance for the map boss to drop an additional map. This meant that it was possible to sustain maps by rushing to those bosses and ignoring every other monster in the map. We have retained the overall bonus, but have changed it so the map drops from a random monster within the map rather than the boss.
Jo, nebo tohle taky zabili, nepřekvapivě. Zatím bych řekl, že všechno strašně výborný změn.
Maven boss fight invitations. Currently, it's possible that you get hit with a bad streak of RNG and haven't found an invitation by the time you have enough bosses witnessed. You can now purchase these invitations from Kirak for a moderate price if you need to.
Proč ne? Mapy mají nový tvar zase.
At the launch of the Siege of the Atlas expansion, we hosted a competition that saw players racing to be the first to kill Path of Exile's pinnacle bosses in hardcore solo self-fight. The main prize for doing so was the ability to collaborate with us on the design of a unique item that would drop from a boss in Path of Exile's endgame. 5 of these uniques have been designed so far and will be featured in this expansion. The 6th one will be released once the winner has time to design it, very likely in 3.19.
Takže 5 nových
Call of the Void is a new cold-themed ring that was designed by Lighty and will drop from the Uber Elder. It causes all damage to chill and causes chilled enemies to shatter on death, as though they were frozen. On top of this, chilled enemies deal less damage back to you based on the magnitude of the chill affecting them. The only drawback is that all incoming damage also chills you, but there are many ways to mitigate this, and in some cases it's beneficial to builds that utilize self-chill as part of some crazy combo. This ring is useful for a wide variety of different endgame builds.
V hardcoreu to bude strašně mocný.
Echoes of Creation is a new unique helmet also designed by Lighty, which will drop from the Shaper. It's designed for builds that use Warcries and grants an extra use before cooldown to Warcry skills that are socketed in the helmet. It also grants more damage to exerted attacks based on the number of war cries affecting them, but causes you to take damage when you use these attacks. The self-damage number looks really scary, but it can be mitigated by various mechanics such as armor, endurance charges, and life recovery. This powerful niche helmet is ideal for
Líbí
characters
se mi,
that
že
try
ta
to
helma
use as
má
many
svůj
war
velmi
cries as they
unikátní
can.
design. Že ten 3D vzhled je pěkný.
The third lighty unique being introduced is the Burden of Truth, a unique belt which will drop from Cyrus. Broadly speaking, this belt encourages you to have healthy energy shield and life pools and helps you to achieve this by granting you additional energy shield based on a percentage of your maximum life value.
Takže to bude na
The belt both
hybridní
lets some
buildy?
portion of chaos damage hit your energy shield, but also causes some non-chaos damage to bypass your energy shield like it was chaos damage. This is often an upside because splitting damage over both life and energy shield lets you recover both simultaneously.
To je pro
The
hybridní buildy,
Supreme
zajímavé.
Decadence keystone that this belt grants, which is previously restricted to timeless jewels, causes your life flasks to apply to both your life and energy shield at a reduced rate. Overall, this belt is extremely powerful for characters who can build to have a decent energy shield pool while also using life flasks appropriately. The fourth new item that we're featuring today was created by Waggle. It's an amulet called the Eternal Struggle, which will drop from either the Infinite Hunger or the Black Star. The amulet has a pair of Eldritch mods, and the one that is dominant will be based on which of the bosses dropped it. The dominant mod also controls whether the amulet gives a Malignant Madness or Culling Strike bonus. You'll need to work out which of the two bosses to farm based on which half of the amulet you want to
Co
activate.
znamená Malignant? Kritik.
The final unique we're showcasing today was designed by Steel Mage. It's a unique jewel that drops from the Maven. The jewel refers to a random keystone on your passive skill tree and enables you to be able to allocate passives within a radius around that keystone without them being connected to the rest of the tree. While the keystone itself cannot be allocated, this jewel allows you to jump across great distances on the passive tree in a very skill point efficient way.
Tohle to bude brutální.
In addition to these uniques that have come from the boss kill competition, we have added new unique items to the Uber Pinnacle boss fights that can be
Thread of
accessed through
Hope,
some of the new
massive
keystone
ring.
passives. These include a different variation of Thread of Hope that can drop from Uber Cyrus, a new unique jewel which can drop from the Uber Shaper, and special Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels which can roll exclusive Ascendancy notable passives that are not available anywhere else in the game.
Nine Lives je něco novýho.
You'll notice that our last endgame expansion was just 3 months ago, and we're already extending the endgame even further. This is our plan for every expansion leading up to the release of Path of Exile 2. Rather than having a much bigger annual expansion, we plan to add as many endgame improvements into each quarterly expansion as we can, alongside its new challenge league.
Jestli to správně chápu, tak už nebudou expanze.
Every time you come back to Path of Exile.
Vypadá to, že každá liga teď bude jakoby
One of the
expanze.
subtle but important aspects of our plan is to keep adding powerful new chase rewards to Path of Exile's endgame, so that there are always new reasons to complete aspirational content.
To mě pěkně
The
štve,
boss
že-
kill competitions are great because they not only create these rewards, but also immortalize the achievements of some of Path of Exile's best players. We're
bude
going
v
to run
pytli
another boss kill
pro
competition
Gláska
at the
na
launch
tohle.
of Sentinel. This time, players will have to defeat the Uber versions of boss fights that are unlocked by the special keystone passives. We'll post full information in the lead up to release.
Ha ha ha.
We're going to try something new with character balance in this
Balance
expansion.
manifesto,
We're
ale
intentionally making no changes to character power. That
Žádný
means
balance
no
manifesto.
nerfs, no buffs, nothing. Every single build and build guide made for Siege of the Atlas will work exactly the same in Sentinel.
Nice.
You can start planning your league starter right now with full confidence about exactly how it's going to play. However, build exploration is still required in 3.18. Sentinel introduces many difficult challenges, both in the Challenge League itself and in the endgame content. And you're going to have to work out a plan to create characters that are able to handle this content.
To bude mít
With
zajímavý
this
vliv na
release, you can
ekonomiku.
hit the ground running, knowing with confidence which builds are a good starting point for you.
Že už
We
od
don't
začátku
intend to
budou
do
nějaký
this character
předměty
balance
drahý.
freeze every release. For example, 3.19 definitely contains planned changes to character balance. Even though there are
určitě
no
bude
character balance
přebalancování.
changes in 3.18 though, we have still made some changes to actual game content. For example, let's talk about the changes to monster modifiers. Magic and rare monsters in Path of Exile get a lot of their power from their modifiers.
Hlavně
We
ať
came up with the
se
majority of
nepřekrývají
the monster
aury už.
mods over a decade ago, and only substantially added to them with the introduction of the Nemesis and Bloodlines leagues in 2013 and 2014. These mods are unfortunately showing their age. Many of them are unimpactful, and it's quite hard to quickly read their descriptions in the heat of combat. What we need is a new set of mods that are highly impactful in combat,
Gargantuan, to znamená-
keyworded 1 to 2 colored words that are easy to read at a glance, and capable of producing dangerous
To
combinations.
znamená Arch Nemesis
This
mody
is
na něho.
exactly what we designed the Arch
Tohle-
Nemesis
tohle je
mods to
bombardír,
be,
že jo? No
a
právě.
replacement for the core monster mod pool. From 318 onwards, all previous monster mods have been
Steel
replaced by
Infused Vampiric.
Arch-Nemesis mods. No other part of the Arch-Nemesis League has been retained, so there's no more inventory or recipe management. Magic
Vampiric
monsters
je
have
problém,
one
že to znamená
Arch-Nemesis mod shared
cannot
across their pack, and rare monsters typically have 2 mods. However, it's possible to encounter rare monsters with 3 or even 4 Arch-Nemesis mods on them. Combinations of multiple synergistic mods can create quite interesting situations in combat. For example, if you encounter a monster with both Storm Strider and Ice
Tohle to
Prison,
bude oprus,
the Ice
jako.
Prison may block you off so that you are more likely to run into the lightning mirages from the Storm
Jako
Strider.
tohle to bude takovej odpad tohle.
We've done a balance
Jak
pass
tam-
over
jak
the
tam můžou
Arch-Nemesis
dát?
mods before making them core. Some have certainly had their power reduced, particularly when applied to magic monsters. We have also changed how monster experience and drops are calculated, so it's now far more about the difficulty of the mods than about the proportional size of the monster.
Aha.
Various Nemesis and Bloodlines modifiers that were not represented in the Arch-Nemesis mod pool have been added in different ways.
Čím budou těžší monstři, tím lepší loot budou dávat. A nebude to tak, že Rero stejně jako Rero.
For Sentinel, we had a look at whether there were any easy ways we could update it based on what we have learned over the last 6 years. Our plan is to retain the model of 40 challenges with rewards that unlock as you progress through them, but with a goal of providing substantially more challenge to endgame players and substantially more rewards to go with it, of course. In order to achieve this, we've crunched down the easier challenges so that the first reward unlocks after only 6 and the second at 12. These are equivalent in difficulty to 12 and 24 challenges from the old system, respectively.
Bude to
This
těžší
change gives
dosáhnout
us a lot more
40.
space to ramp up to some incredibly difficult challenges towards the end, which
Tím
will take a lot
pádem
of time and
lidi
skill
budou
to
hrát
complete.
díl.
There are now
To je
10
dobrý
different
z
rewards you can
marketingového
unlock,
hlediska.
which comprise 2 complete armor sets, each with a pair of wings. But be warned, the challenges you must complete are much harder than any that we have ever set you before. We've been experimenting with support for game controllers on the
poražte
PC
20
version of Path of
Uberheroesů.
Exile. During the Arch-Nemesis League, we began a beta for controller support and have been making improvements based on your
Kontroler
suggestions and
mě
feedback.
nezajímá.
We're pleased to announce that controller support on PC will officially launch alongside the Sentinel expansion. This also means that Path of Exile is now fully playable on the Steam Deck for those of you who are lucky enough to have one so far. Alongside finishing controller support for PC, we've also done a push on various small quality of life features in this expansion, which we'll reveal over the coming days. An example is that you can now choose whether your hideout portals can be accessed by one of 4 options: everyone, your friends, your guild members, or no one. We have also improved how favored maps are selected on the Atlas. Rather than having to click on the map on the Atlas for every slot, you can instead click on one of your existing favorite maps to quickly copy it to the new slot. This makes it a lot faster to favor many instances of the same map at once. There are plenty more small QOL features crammed into Sentinel, and we'll cover these over the week leading up to release.
Takže zase budou po malých dávkách říkat tyhle ty zlepšení.
Early in the Arch-Nemesis League, we debuted Kerrick's Vault Pass. Purchasing this pass grants you access to Kerrick's Vault, where you can claim exclusive unique items to complete map bonus objectives in the Atlas endgame. The Vault Pass for the Arch-Nemesis League is only available for a few more days and will leave the store forever when this league ends. There's no penalty for purchasing the pass late in the league after you've wrapped up your map completion. So if you are pleased with where you got to in Arch-Nemesis and want to lock in your unique skins, it's not too late to buy your pass now. Thank you to everyone who unlocked Kerrick's Vault. We had a lot of fun putting it together and tried to think of fun ways that unique item skins can interact with gameplay in a visual way. The purchases directly fund development of both Path of Exile 1 and 2. A brand new Vault Pass will launch alongside the Sentinel League. Like the previous one, there are 8 exclusive unique item skins that can be unlocked as you complete map bonus objectives. We'll post full details of these new rewards closer to launch. To buy either the Arch-Nemesis Pass now, before it leaves the store forever, or the Sentinel one when the expansion launches, go to pathofexile.com/vault.
Tohle dejte nám peníze, dáme vám digitální
Alongside today's
obrázky.
live stream, we're launching 2 new series of supporter packs, the Arcanist and Reaper packs. Each tier contains the pack's full face value in points, plus several exclusive microtransactions. These packs are only available during the Sentinel League and will leave the store forever in 3 months. Every microtransaction you're about to see is entirely cosmetic and does not affect your character's progression or power. The Arcanist pack series contains 7 exclusive microtransactions.
Jo, portál?
The Cloak of Elements indicates the power of your fire, cold, and lightning resistances on your back. When a resistance is capped, the effect is extra strong. While wearing the Ring of the Black Star, your level up effect looks like this.
To
In the Timekeeper's hideout, you can use the chronosphere to change the time of day from dawn to noon to dusk to night.
Takže budete chodit do hideoutů, který budou podezřet tmavý.
With Chevron's tome on your belt, identifying items will cause exploding books to appear nearby. The Mage Blue map device blossoms with greater intensity as you open higher tier maps.
To je pěkný. Tohle je hodně pěkný Harvest map device jako.
With the soul-stunning weapon effect attached to your weapon, any attacks that stun will cause your enemies to have an out-of-body experience. Drinking from the searing Quicksilver flask causes an explosion and sets your character on fire. The Reaper Pack series also has 7 exclusive cosmetic microtransactions. The Soul Harvester's cloak's power is based on the number of enemies your character has killed.
To je hodně zajímavý, jak ty vzhledové věci se chovají podle toho, co se děje ve hře. To se mi hodně líbí. Já si to nekoupím, ale je to zajímavý.
The Ghostlit Graveyard is a hideout where you can control the color of its torches. It also comes with 6 exclusive hideout decorations. Medidrone will follow you around and use a healing beam on you whenever you're gaining life. Thanks, Medidrone.
Medidrone.
The Underworld portal opens a gateway to Hell. Its effect upgrades in Part 2 and again in maps, where it indicates what tier of map you're playing.
To se moc nelíbí tohle.
While wearing the Ring of the Exorcist, any spells you cast will exorcise the ghosts of your enemies if you crit.
To je zajímavý, to bude ukazovat, kdy kritnete, jo. To je hodně pay to win teda. Pay to information.
As I mentioned before, these packs are exclusive to the Sentinel League and will leave the store in 3 months. They're available right now at pathofexile.com/purchase, and they directly fund the ongoing development of Path of Exile 2 and Path of Exile 1 expansions like Sentinel. We greatly appreciate your support.
Na to, že to je něco, co se mě vůbec netýká, tak bych řekl, že třeba 8 z 10 věcí se mi fakt líbí.
We'll begin the Q&A in a few moments, so please get your questions ready in chat.
Hodně dobrý, to. Co si o to myslíte? Co si o to myslíte? 82% nesvěděl jsem začátek zajímavé věci, spíš se dívím, že mají furt nápady na přidávanici. Hodně dobrý, jo? 80% po 45 minutách. Nerv Omniscience nebude. Nerv Omniscience nebude, ale bude to vzácnější drop. Kde je ta tabulka, prosím? Nevím, o jaký tabulce se bavíš. Takže řekl bych, že ty amulety, místo toho, aby měly nějaký 15% drop rate, tak typu, že budou mít 1 až 5% drop rate, takže budou vzácnější na nalezení. Ale pravděpodobně budou pořád stejně mocný. Pořád stejný build jak v téhle verze, ano. Já se trošičku bojím, že to může být věc, na který oni pohořejí. Já bych řekl, že něco měli přebalancovat, tyjo. Klidně mohli udělat jenom to, kouknout se na 10 nejhranějších buildů a o 30% je kuchnout. Protože to by, když nic jiného, pro některé lidi znamenalo, kouknu se aspoň na něco jiného. Řekl bych, že tohle toho budou litovat. Protože strašně moc lidí, tím jak ty buildy už znají, tak budou hrát totéž a hrozně rychle to dohrajou. Na druhou stranu, nevíme, jak strašně těžký bude ten Uber content, že jo? Je teoreticky možný, že to bude tak těžký, že než se na takovou úroveň dostanete, tak i se znalostma buildů, které jsou fakt silný, to bude trvat dlouho. Jdeme na to.
Hey Exiles, and welcome back. It is the Giddy here with none other than Chris Wilson. How are you going this morning, Chris?
Hey, good, thanks. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for hosting another Q&A and having me on to ask you some questions. Always a pleasure. I think we have to straight away jump into the last part. This is completely different to my planned order of events here, but does the Medidrone actually heal you? People almost like pay to win in chat.
Ne,
oh, no, it's just
když jste healovaný,
právě. Healed from flasks and stuff, which you can see in the UI already.
Lidi musí poslouchat, co oni říkají.
And that's a theme for a lot of the new microtransaction is trying a new visual twist on showing information that players already have access to.
Yeah, you guys are
No s tím krytem si nejsem moc jistý, jestli k tomu máme přístup.
Although I have to say I wasn't really a fan of the blood-sucking insects one. Why would I pay money for that? That's horrible.
I reckon it's going to be low-key quite popular, because what's going to happen is the packs will eventually go off sale, people will have it, and they'll forget about it, and then you'll see someone covered in insects, and think, what is happening?
No, that's my least favorite thing, thank you. Okay. So I thought we'd kick things off actually with Sentinel first. And I wanted to ask what inspirations led to us having a cute little drone league this time around.
Well, we tried not to make them too cute. So our motivation here was that we wanted to have a combat mechanic that was kind of like a build your own breach kind of thing, something where you can take combat with you and it doesn't interrupt the flow of gameplay. You know, normally when you're playing like Breach or Delirium, there's a point in the map where we say now it's time for there to be some dynamic combat stuff. And so here we thought, what if we make a mechanic where several different times during a map the player can choose the right time that they get to deploy their Sentinel and have juiced up combat for a while.
Does a design like this happen with where you come up with the idea first and then the like mechanics of it?
No.
Follow on, or do you have like, oh, we want to do this mechanically,
and come
up with a theme for this?
We came up with mechanics first. In this case, the goal was to have something which tags monsters around you, making them a lot harder and more rewarding. And then from there we realized we can have complicated mods on this. And it actually started off with a bit of an organic theme. Like our initial like random idea, you know, thrown together on a Saturday was that this was some kind of like growth on the character that projects something at the monsters. And that's actually why. So computer scientists in the crowd will notice that the method we use for combining Sentinels is very similar to genetic programming, the concept of taking some properties from one, properties from the other, and having a chance of mutation. And that analogy worked well with the organic side, because you're kind of like breeding these growths or whatever, but it ended up working a lot better, like, you know, in terms of understandability, to have Sentinels that follow you around. And the analogy for creating new ones there is that because the power is depleted, you need to create a new one around a power core, and you don't really know how the Sentinels work. Because they're ancient technology, so you're kind of putting it together the best you can, and that's why you get a combination of properties.
Hlavně, ať není možný vydat a majnovat nějakou tabulku, z čeho vznikne co. To by byl největší fail.
But I'm interested in this idea of like fantasy technology, like ancient lost technologies that are more advanced. That's like a theme I love, and it's something that Path of Exile's been doing more and more over time. This sort of like ancient, otherworldly, or esoteric technology. Has this always been a plan for PoE's like world building, or is it something that's evolved over time?
Well, there was a bit of it there from the beginning with the Val, right? They're a civilization that clearly has a lot of interesting stuff going on that predates what the player is currently doing by thousands of years. And so we just established the fact that they have stuff like floating machines already. Now, of course, the Sentinels are not technology there. Something else the players might be able to piece clues together about, but yeah, we feel it's established that there is ancient technology that's honestly a lot more powerful than what's going on in Rayclast currently.
It's sad when ancient technologies like automatic doors are lost. Too bad. Maybe we'll rediscover.
To je vtip s Alvatem
one day.
What about the weight of the door?
Oh no. Quote.
Protože v Incursionách se automaticky otvírá něco v templu, potom už ne.
So how much harder do the Sentinels make enemies, and in what ways do they make them harder? I wasn't really clear on that watching it.
So they make combat harder in several ways. From your point of view, the monsters that when they attack you, they're doing damage and more stuff, and when you attack them, they're harder to kill. And this honestly varies a lot depending on the rarity of the monster. With a normal monster, which obviously has very low life and damage to start with, they're buffed a lot more percentage-wise than a rare or unique monster. So if we're applying, like, I don't know, this is me picking a number out of the air, like a 400% buff to a normal monster, we're certainly not applying a 400% buff to Katava. And it's in a way similar to Delirium. It did similar types of
My můžeme buffnout
Now, this also depends on the type of Sentinel. For example, the one that empowers the entire screen, the Pandemonium Sentinel, it has a bit less of a buff than the one which is specifically there to target specific monsters, or the one which is a little bit slower at targeting monsters, the Stalker Sentinel. And all of this is captured in that empowerment arbitrary number that's scored on the Sentinel. And this is just a number, it doesn't directly correlate to a percentage the player can understand, but it is used internally at
Věci v chatu budu číst nejspíš poté, co... Hele, dostal jsem křídla, hej. Já to hotový, věci v chatu budu asi číst především až po tomhle tom. Teďko se hodně věnuju tomuhle, abych ty informace měl.
The key thing about this is that we've tried very hard to make sure that empowerment is given to you proportional to any you know, like extra bonuses and stuff you're getting. So it's like with maps where you get pack size and quantity and that kind of thing as you put harder and harder mods on the maps. The same thing is true for your Sentinels, that as you make better and better ones, they'll proportionally get better empowerment to go with it.
Okay. I like the idea that this is like ancient lost technology we don't understand, and also the mechanic is a little bit obscure as well. Was that kind of intentional?
We especially don't want people understanding how the combination process stuff works, but yeah, the general rule is Sentinels give you the opportunity to make combat a lot harder than normal, and in return you'll get rewarded. And there are some cases where the rewards double dip, which are quite interesting that I can talk about.
Hele, některé odměny se prý můžou sčítat.
But how do you design something like that then that manages to keep some level of obscurity in a system like this?
Well, from a crafting point of view, the rules are all server-side, so we can come up with complicated random things on the server and hope people can't reverse engineer it. On the client, though,
přečti si ty věci ve věkční drops a podívej se na ty poslední dva odkazy.
To this damage stuff, so we pretty much get to make big spreadsheets on our end, implement it to do that model, and try as much as possible to make sure that players are rewarded for any additional difficulty they have. We don't want a situation where you get a bad sentinel that's making combat harder and not giving you something for it. And so every bit of additional difficulty.
Řekl bych, že Sentinel by mohl být zábavný během příběhu.
Notwithstanding any of the other bonuses you get to item drops.
I find that like balancing point of like the obscurity versus.
Celkově si myslím, že to nebude zas taková pecka, ale na druhou stranu je to prostě jednoduchá lead mechanika. Ale zajímavý budou ty kombinátory předmětů. A ty se těším.
Whether players can sort of still engage with the mechanic and feel like they're having some level of control over it. Do you think there's like a level of player control here?
Well, we want to make sure that people understand the core principles of it, even if the actual math behind the scenes is intentionally obfuscated. And the principle here basically is, it's like with other things that juice the combat difficulty is, juice it as much as you can, but not too much, otherwise you'll die. And so there's an extreme level of
ten Uber content mě trošku proudí, protože to znamená, že budu zase muset hrát Shapera.
Secondly, you choose which sentinel you're using, like what mods it has on it. Are you using a unique? Are you using just a regular magic one? Or regular normal or magic one? Have you managed to find a rare with good mods? You have your entire sentinel controller to spec how you want. And if, for example, the sentinel combat is too hard, there are ways in your controller to spec more in the direction of rewards and less in the direction of empowerment. And of course, respecking there is free, so it's relatively easy to dynamically adjust the difficulty, so it's never too hard for you, and you're just getting constant rewards from it.
Nice. How much is this affecting the reward then, since we're juicing up these monsters?
The empowerment that affects difficulty also proportionally affects item quantity, rarity, and experience. And you can also get these additional reward icons on monsters. You'll notice in the footage, when the Sentinels empower monsters, occasionally you see like a currency icon or something appear above them, or a unique icon. Now, it's worth noting, there's a base level of monsters giving out these reward icons, of Sentinels giving out these reward icons. So even if you have no mods on the Sentinel and no speccing into anything fancy, you'll occasionally get reward icons. But there are lots of mods that will give you additional reward icons a percentage of the time. Now, these mods are factored into the empowerment number, so it double dips where because the mod is on the thing, the monster is slightly harder, which means that it stacks more rarity and quant as a side effect. And so you get kind of a double dipping effect there where you get twice as many, effective rewards.
Double dipping. How often do Sentinels drop, and where
Sentinelové, že budou zvedat i kvantitu a raritu
Sentinels as you play through the game, and they also drop from Sentinel caches, which are, scattered
Sentinel
throughout
cache,
the world.
aha.
They're pretty often. The
Takže to
intention
bude
is
jako
not that you
smuggler's
run out of
cache.
Sentinels, right? You'll always have Sentinels to use. The question is whether you have good ones or not. And you'll notice they're corrupted, so you can't just drop alks on them. It is actually difficult to have a constant supply of good rare Sentinels, but
Ale jsou
you
to
can put the work
tradovatelný,
in, you
říkal
can
já.
spec into this stuff, you can, do clever combining, and we expect that any good player in Path of Exile will generally have good Sentinels that they can use most of the time. And I understand the concerns that this feels like a bit of micromanagement, but it honestly plays pretty streamlined. Essentially, you can use Sentinels for a number of maps, and there are lots available to drop more ones in as they're depleted. And if you'd like to Sentinel enough that you miss it when it's run out of power, then that's a really good candidate for combining. Because if you combine two things together and you liked both of them, chances are you're getting something roughly similar out the other end. Occasionally you might get something worse, but sometimes you'll also get something better, and it could get a cool mutation on it where you get some mod which you'd never considered that suddenly starts like duplicating enemies when they're tagged, for example, or doing a lot of other cool stuff. And so we'll see some very interesting things. This is the worst analogy to ever mention on Twitch, but they'll kind of be like breeding a bloodline of good Sentinels.
Jo, co hard mode? Počkat, to musíme
I've
napsat.
been playing Crusader Kings recently. I know all about that. Okay.
I'm gonna just switch to Twitch chat. Nice.
how crucial is this like combining up of the Sentinels, and how do you like design a mechanic like this to avoid the like talisman, like for the old players of PoE, situations where these mechanics become really laborious because there's a lot of combining?
So you don't really combine up through the tiers, you find better tiers of Sentinels. So as you play through the game, you'll find better and better ones. You do combine if you want to have a chance at making Sentinels that have combinations of mods that you like. So the theoretical best Sentinels can come from combining. So in terms of base types, the way it works is there's a progression from low level to high level, just like you know, bows or wands or something like that. And we also have a few other base types that can only come through combining. But once you've got it from combining, you can then potentially persist that one by combining it with other ones and getting lucky. The purpose of combining is when you're finished with 2 Sentinels you found effective, you get a chance to get something that's moderately similar to what you put in.
Něco v nějakých
That really
power
helps
corech,
with
který
sustaining
nějakou
rare
nabíjet,
Sentinels
ne?
as well as occasionally getting good unique ones and so on. The
Že stejně jako
talisman
teď.
comparison is a good one, but we have learnt very much from the problems of that league.
já
And
si
the
taky
first
myslím, že
problem
to je
we had with
problém.
talisman was that the item you were making was competing with amulets, right? You know, it was hard to get good rare
pro lidi,
talismans,
co se
and it was
nedostanou
easy
do
to get good rare
nejtěžšího
amulets,
obsahu.
so therefore talismans were worthless much of the time. Here, it is hard to get good rare Sentinels, but nothing else can go in that slot, and so it's a bit of a slower item progression than what people are used to. We've definitely designed the combining system to be more of a crafting system, rather than Talisman, where you couldn't do stuff on demand. If you wanted to do combining, you had to go and find some stones, do a whole boss fight, etc. Here, you can make new Sentinels wherever you want to.
No ale hlavně říkal, že se dá tradovat, ne?
The item crafting system where you can combine armors in a similar fashion, how
Yeah,
similar is
synthesizovat.
that to the Sentinel crafting? Like, will combining a bunch of Sentinels kind of give you an idea of how that's going to then work on items?
Yes, it's quite similar. Basically, we were looking for something you can do to make new, like, you know, really cool rares, and we realized that we have the system that was entirely designed around the genetic programming of assembling new Sentinels, and it would work really well for rare items. And so we basically tried it, and we came up with a bunch of interesting mods that can go on each of the slots, and I think we haven't previewed any particular ones yet, but the announcement page at pathofexile.com/sentinel has a bunch of mods that people can see in the relevant hovers there, and there's some pretty juicy stuff.
Teďko, jakmile to řek, tak teďko jim spadly stránky, jsem si jistý.
But the intention basically is, this is not meant to be the way that people make the best item in the game, but it may make some of the best items in the game if they're lucky. And we've had conversations internally that involve questions like putting items that are mirror-worthy versus items that are strange on the other side, and interesting border cases that happen with the rules to try to make items that are mirror-worthy come out that, you know. Anyway, interesting stuff going on with that. So we think that the Path of Excel players will really like trying to model how that works and to get the best value for their recombinators.
That's me every time I craft anything.
Tohleto synthesizování, na to se těším. Fakt doufám, že nebude moc být nějaká, že nebude vydataminovaný prostě toto plus toto rovná se toto. To bylo zoufalý.
I think especially if some of these recombinators make their way into standard, there could be some interesting things that happen after the league ends.
Are there any like hard rules with this recombinator thing, like for getting
takhle rekombinátory,
modifiers, or is it just kind of going to be like very hard to understand?
It's very random, but I'll be more specific about roughly how this works, and this is probably the most information you're getting, right? So you put 2 items in, and it's going to pick one of the 2 base types. So for example, it'll pick the left or the right. Now with Sentinels, it has a chance to mutate the base type into a special one or to create a unique. We don't want the recombination process for your equipment to necessarily just randomly change the base type on you or to turn into a unique, because honestly, sometimes that's going to be worth less than the items you put in. So once it's picked a base type, for Sentinels, it uses that base type, and for your items, it retains all the properties of that core base type. For example, any enchants you've got on it, any sockets, corrupted status, implicits, all of that stuff.
Korapnutý věci můžeme
you know, catalysts or whatever. This all gets dragged along with whichever base type was selected. Then for the explicit mod selection, it basically puts everything in a pool and selects some subset of it. So you get some mods from one of the items, some mods from the other. Sometimes you're unlucky and get way fewer mods than you started with. Sometimes you're lucky and get a whole bunch of good ones you liked. Then there's a chance for various things to occur, like it randomly tinkering with the tiers of the mods or re-rolling values. And of course it can add special mods, basically the mutation.
Tyhle ty rekombinátory budou extrémně vzácný. A nepřekvapilo by mě, kdyby po této lize nepřešli do standardu, kdyby přestali existovat, protože si řeknou, že to je moc mocný.
Of course the Sentinels work well without those mods, but they're a lot more powerful with them. And the same is true for regular rare items.
Řekl bych, že tyhle ty rekombinátory budou stát desítky a stovky exaltů za pár let. Možná několik mirrorů. Zatím se mi to zdá jako na úrovni Eternal Orbu. dobu
does sound like
celkem.
a lot of fun. Back to gameplay on Sentinel for a little bit. What's to stop players from using a Sentinel on a boss like right before it dies to subvert the challenge?
Right, so basically when a monster is empowered, it is fully healed. And most of the time, Sentinels empower monsters before you get a chance to get to that monster. And so there's
Když
no
použijete
problem whatsoever.
Sentinela, tak
If
to
you
plně
were to,
vyhealuje
try to cheese
nepřítele.
a boss down to
Takže,
one life and then bring your
takže
Sentinel
je
up, then
dobrý,
yes, you do have to fight it again.
takže je dobrý
It's worth
to dělat na
noting,
začátku
one of
toho
the pieces
souboje.
of consistent feedback we've had internally when people first see our promotional material before they've played the league is they say, well, with Path of Exile clear speed what it is, this is going to be so lame because the Sentinels are slow at tagging monsters and therefore I have to wait for them all the time. When they play the league, they realize it's very, very easy to spec into a Sentinels are very fast at tagging monsters and chain through monsters, and you get multiple beams, multiple chains, lots of tagging speed. And generally speaking, we've tested on very fast map characters, and if you spec correctly, there's no problem whatsoever with the Sentinels staying ahead of you. And of course, you have ones that hit a whole screen at once. The other thing to note is, and this is something that we didn't really emphasize there, is the Sentinels tag up to a specific number of monsters. So this means the one that tags a whole screen, you don't need to go and grab the entire map. Like, you don't have to have this lame playstyle where you pull the whole map to one place and then hit go to get everything tagged. It does have a limit. And this also means that as long as you're killing fast enough and the Sentinel's tagging stuff fast enough that you use its full limit, then it doesn't really matter if it misses hitting a couple of monsters due to you being so OP, because you'll still get full value out of that Sentinel.
Okay. How does co-op work in Sentinel? I'm always interested in this question.
So basically with co-op, we've tried really hard to make sure that it doesn't penalize players. Both players can use their Sentinels in a map. A monster can only be tagged by only empowered by one Sentinel at once, but they can tag more monsters in an instance.
To znamená, že imperiánská skupina, kde jich je 6, budou mít 6násobek Sentinelů. To bude mega kvantita rarita. Party play extrémně silný v tom případě.
I thought it would only be like the map creator or something, but I like that a lot more.
There's some good griefing opportunities where, like, you know your guy you're playing with is waiting
To
to
je
tag
extrémně
that
mocný
boss with an
tato
Apex
informace.
Sentinel, so you just hit your Pandemonium one faster than him and just tag them out.
Uh-oh.
This is immediately what comes to mind for me.
That's fine though, because like if you're playing in a party, you should be like trying to work together. And if you're not, well,
Are you sure?
That's
My first experience with multiplayer Diablo 2 was we were killing Duriel in a public Battle.net game. This is back like 22 years ago. And I'm playing an Amazon. So Duriel dies, drops Worm Skull, grab it as fast as I can. And the Necro says, "Who got that?" And I say nothing. So that's the history behind multiplayer play for me.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Oh, that's why we have being able to kill each other at the bandits.
Honestly, yeah. It's nice for there to be some sharp edges occasionally.
Yeah. The bandit one's always like such an easy thing to forget as well.
Yeah. And chat's right, this is ninja looting, not scamming. We didn't have a deal. We didn't have no. He wasn't helping me with Duriel. I was helping him.
It's very different, okay? Okay. With league mechanics like this, when they're itemized in some way, it inevitably comes up. You have to make a decision about whether they're tradable or not. So what people think is tradable is often much more in the spirit of Path of Exile, I find. We've sometimes seen this actually makes players less willing to use the
Trošku mě vadí, jak to je velký
for
4x4,
example, where people were selling all of their currency instead of using it. What goes into the decision to make something like Sentinel tradable?
So in general, tradability is preferred, especially when there's other forms of progression. Like in Arch Nemesis, the mods that you had were your progression. And so if we made those tradable, then you could literally skip the league, find some exalts, trade them for the ability to do the hardest Arch Nemesis content. Here, because you have your Sentinel controller, which powers up as you kill empowered enemies, you do actually have to engage with the league to progress with it, and therefore tradability is totally fine with the items in it. We also wanted to make sure with the combining system that players are able to trade for Sentinels that will combine well together, right? You know, there's one of those things where if you look at your pool of Sentinels and realize you don't have a good combine available, but you have a couple of Chaos Orbs spare, maybe you trade for something amazing and try to, something that's been depleted and try to combine it with something that you liked. This also means that once you've finished with a Sentinel, like let's say you don't like combining, you just want to play with your Sentinels, you can take the ones that were good and rather than combining them, you can trade them to other people to get some currency that you can use to buy potentially full Sentinels or actual items you want to play with or maps or whatever.
Co tam říkali o nějakém tom power core?
Creating cyberpunk scrap merchants now. That's fun. Great.
Fortune core?
Lots of people are asking about Headhunter with
Jo takhle, takže tyhle ty kory, to jsou ty kombinátory.
How is Headhunter working now with this change?
Just the same as before, right?
Yeah, you steal the mods, and then you're powerful, and then we cry.
Headhunterem můžem tyhle ty věci získat, jo. Takže nějaký berserky, gargantuany, vampiriky a tak.
What's the news with Ultimatum?
We have a specific plan for Ultimatum, and we like this plan, and it's cool, and it's honestly cooler than the plan of let's just bring it back next league or something. And so we're going to do the cool plan, but that means you're not going to see Ultimatum for a little while. And I can't give any more information out. So yeah, no Ultimatum, but it's not just being ignored, right? And we have an awesome plan for it.
Bereme nějaký dobrý plán s Ultimátum ligou.
Keep looking at mechanics and being like, it's just like Ultimatum.
The good news is the Ulta stuff in its current form will feel a lot more like Ultimatum, right? So they get to enjoy that.
That's what I mean.
Jo, to je taky, že Atlas skill tree na oltáře.
On this topic before we have apparently a lot of questions from chat. Okay. Well, HD, will there be any raw currency to refill the Sentinels? Just like if you have a good one, you just want to straight up recharge.
We don't have any raw currency that does, but you will be going through quite a lot of Sentinels, and this is intentional. And to be completely honest, I'm going to explain this, right? So we know that it's controversial that these things run out of charge, right? We're not trying to just hurt the players, but in the version of this that we designed, where you use them forever, it was really boring. You get an okay Sentinel on day 2, and you just use it forever. And because of that, we had to make the good mods really rare. You never see them.
Ale bojím se, že jsou velikostí 2x2 čtverečky.
And so we tried this model
where they run out of charge. You're
constantly combining stuff together, and you see the full gamut of the league. You try new experiences.
No smoking. Občas to chvíli trvá. Když tak klikni na tyhle ty dvě věci a potom si ho možná zobrazím. Ale občas to třeba chvíli trvá.
You have an insane time for a few maps, and this means that if you want to play with it every map, you just trade for one over and over. And so the model here with the recharging, honestly, is so much more fun than the one where you just get a perfect Sentinel or something good enough a few days in and never touch the league again.
I wonder if there's like a double pen under Sentinel if you combine 2 of them together or something. Okay. Carrybag asks, how do you get filaments for the passive tree thing?
It's just clicking on the sections, basically. There are these grooves, you click on it, a filament appears, you click on it, it goes away. It's literally a planning tool, right? There's no item, there's no specking, there's no points. Basically, you have an amount of power that will flow to the filaments.
Ale já nechápu, že mají ten planning tool a ještě to neudělali na skill tree, cože?
Google and find the best filament guide and spec it in on the first day and leave it and never open the panel again for the entire league, and it will magically fill with power as you level up your Sentinel controller. Or you can go in there and tinker with it. And we're far more worried, because a lot of people, when looking at the reaction, were saying this is complicated and involves micromanagement. But I expect, honestly, they'll just spec something that looks good, later change it once or twice, and be done with it for the most part. Unless you're a player who really, really cares about micromanaging stuff, in which case, have a great time. To the point where we have insane rules to do with snapshotting to stop people, like, auto hotkeying something where it changes to one Sentinel spec, they release that Sentinel, then they change it to a different, like... The abuse case makes this a living nightmare to implement, but we think we've got something that's not going to get in the way of players actually playing it.
I didn't even think about that.
Well, I'm glad we thought of it before the players did, because...
yeah, that's good. They're giving us infinite filaments, I'm so excited. So good. Okay. A name that is way too long, Namvan, asks, can you use unique sentinels to make other sentinels?
They're not currently used in combining, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't randomly turn that on without telling people, if you see what I mean. But go experiment with stuff. This is the fun part of the league. We've got it in testing. It's going to be on alpha probably today for people who have alpha access. Do not email me for alpha access. You will not... Anyway, sorry. Just saving my inbox. We've got it going on alpha, we're going to get feedback, and this is the week where we get to make extra things that are fun, right? We get to look at it and go, maybe we should allow combining uniques or something like that, and come up with some extra stuff. So yeah, we'll come up with some cool ideas there.
Combining uniques, that's super fun. With these recombinations, Amorous asks, is there any way to connect influences on items together? So you combine 2 different influence items together. Can they do the same thing as an awaken orb and smush them together?
I'm
going to do the dev check on that one to make sure I'm explaining exactly how it works. So, what's the deal with influences?
Well, the short answer is no.
Yep.
The long answer is it picks the non-influence based type. Then it won't be able to select influence mods.
Right, okay. So when it's selecting base types, it
Když
picks one or
nemůže
the other.
vybrat
And if it picks
influence,
one
okay.
that is not influenced, it cannot select mods from the other one that have that influence or have influence, because then they couldn't copy across. So the influences have to match in order for it to copy the mod. And there's still so much
Takže to
crazy
může být
use that players will
influencnutý,
work
jo.
out with this kind of stuff. Like, we're coming up with crazy cases here where we have to put contrived stuff in to stop players making insane items that shouldn't exist. And even then, there's going to be a lot of rares that really have impossible mods on them that we are tolerating, and that's only the stuff we can think about. So, yeah.
All right. That answers the following question. Perfect. In that case, we shall move on to the next section. Let's talk a little bit about the endgame atlas, in particular the passive tree side of things, which was a huge
Ty
introduction.
keystony jsou
last league,
super,
and,
jako to jsem fakt,
expanded on with
už 2,5 měsíce jsem doufal, že se to stane.
so we're being given a lot more control over our endgame experience now. Both these days in general, and also specifically now. Like keystones, for example, allowing us to only drop our favorite maps, and
Jo,
nodes that disable unwanted.
to je tak strašně geniální tohle.
This and the new passive tree overall feels like a big shift compared to PoE of yesteryear. What's led to the dramatic change for PoE's endgame and like player agency levels?
So, a lot of the time when we change our mind about something or do an experiment is because Path of Exile 2 is in the future. And we want to make sure Path of Exile 2 is the best game for the players possible. And that means, generally speaking, if we've tried something and there's a possibility we want to do it differently in PoE 2, we will try the other thing. And so with Siege of the Atlas, we said, have a ton of control over all this stuff. And players loved it, and it went really well. And so we're giving a bunch more control here, see how that goes. We have a lot of stuff lined up for the endgame updates between now and PoE 2, and we'll get a bunch of information, and then, you know, reserve the right to change things massively when PoE 2 comes out, potentially.
It's a nice like safety net for you guys, I guess, because with a PoE 2 you can suddenly make big sweeping changes that otherwise people might be a little bit more resistant to. So it's that kind of...
we have a schedule for like, I know exactly how many leagues there are between now and PoE 2, and we're putting the bullet points in of what we're going to do in these, and that's really helpful. Like, it gives us an actual runway of knowing this is how many times we have to experiment. Like, I have hard mode penciled in for one of these releases, and we know exactly ideally how that element's going to finish up, and how much time it's going to give us between the release of hard mode and the release of PoE 2 for us to take feedback into account and see if there's any tweaks we'd make to the itemization based on data from that.
How many leagues are until PoE, sorry, did you say?
It's a number. It's a countable whole number.
And I guess the follow-up question for a later question I was going to ask anyway. How many leagues until hard mode?
Probably 2, but we can talk about that when you ask the question.
All right.
Hard mode až za 2 ligy, jo.
So that's in my list somewhere.
Nah.
Back to the Atlas though, since that's what we're talking about at the moment. How successful overall do you feel that the new Atlas passive tree has been, and by what metrics do you use to measure success of something like this when you implement it?
So, we didn't really use metrics. We kind of knew it's awesome because we play the game ourselves and we know it kind of feels right to us. So when we did it, we thought this is cool, and that's kind of good enough. And sure, if players absolutely hated it, we would have, like, you know, had a second thought about that, but we didn't look at metrics, you know? I mean, here's an interesting thing, right? If you said to me, what was player retention like last league, I would have said, absolutely amazing. Best ever. People played more, and all this amazing stuff. But if you look at the numbers, they quit in droves when Lost Ark came out because you can't miss the release of that game, right? And then Elden Ring came out. Like, there was no way that people were going to get the full in-game experience. But yet, I still feel that endgame had the best retention because the players who happened to not be interested in the other 2 games played so much more than usual. And so to some extent, because a lot of our community went to play those really good other RPGs, we're expecting this is the actual release of the endgame for them. Like, there are so many people who... And we're ignoring the fact that Diablo Immortal comes out in a few weeks, by the way, guys. That's not a game. We're going to play Path of Exile. But because people are sticking around for the whole league this time, they're actually going to have a full league with the new systems for the first time.
That's like an interesting counterpoint, I guess, like looking at metrics then, is that there's always like other things that are going on as well. Because I think a lot of people feel the same way, that like this last league is like in some ways the best Path of Exile has been, especially for me, like endgame, especially like best endgame I've played in PoE. And yet, other games came out. Man, I'm sorry.
No, I completely understand. And that was unlucky for us. It would have been great if Siege did, you know, have an uninterrupted 3 months, but life happens, and that involves other games. And with this release as well, it also gives people, because of the static balance thing where there's a balance freeze, it gives people the ability to just pre-plan what build they're going to play and just know there's all this cool in-game stuff they can do and have a chance to actually, like... when our internal staff members worked out due to lack of balance things, the balance is probably going to be the same. I started to see people like 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the end of the league start testing characters that are already public characters. Nothing's changed, of course, because they want to be ready for league launch day. And that gives all of the players the ability to do the same thing, where they can pick a build, try it out, work out their plan, and know with confidence.
Takže nebudu muset dělat video o Tornado Shot
to the
update
point where there are bug
18.
fixes, where I've had very long repeated conversation where people say to me, it's not a nerf, it's a bug fix, Chris, and we haven't put it in because technically it does affect how a build performs. And so we've left bugs in the damn game for this league. They're going to be fixed in 3.19, but you get to use those bugs again if you want to, if that's the build.
Okay, I find that really funny.
Shape prostě plus 2 projekt, to je šílený.
Okay. No, what were we talking about? I feel like we're getting sidetracked a lot today. It's great. Oh yeah. So the passive tree, the Atlas passive tree thing. That thing's awesome. I love that. How do you guys feel about where like the concept of tree lock-in is at? That is like the ease and cost of respecing the Atlas tree.
We're pretty happy with it. There's the vendor trade that caps the price from things getting too expensive, and we're not seeing players constantly respecing the tree too often. To some extent, we want it to be expensive to respec, but it's turned out to be in a pretty good place. So we do want to avoid strategies where you respec between encounters and so on. But technically, if you have the wealth, you can do that kind of strategy if you need to.
Yeah, it's kind of in line with the regular passive trees in that regard. The only kind of like friction point that I've thought of there is the idea of like different characters having the same shared passive tree. I love that it's shared progression, but rather if you've got like a bossing character and a mapping character, it's awkward that you can't have like separate trees for them. Is that something you guys have talked about at all?
There's some discussion about this. Like, we do acknowledge that that's certainly a thing, but we don't have any firm plans for it. There's various repercussions, both from a implementation point of view and in terms of, like, obviously it lets you then have multiple Atlas specs that you can easily switch between for the cost of just hitting maps with a new character, which may be enough of a cost, but we don't have any firm plans, but it's certainly something that's being discussed.
Okay. Do you guys have like allocation, like heat maps for the Atlas passive tree? I think I remember
No, to by mě zajímalo.
The regular passive tree at some point.
Podle mě rozhodně po pravé straně.
We can generate the data. We generally don't generate the data.
Harbinger, všichni
there was an
Harbinger.
internal joke that we generate stats for news posts and then we get a chance to see what people are doing. We honestly balance based on actually how things feel a lot of the time, because it's just so easy to look at the stats and completely misinterpret how something completely misinterpret the stats by accident. There are people who write in by looking at PoE.ninja and say, because of this percentage you need to do blah, and when we look at our data just to double check it, it's entirely different because of some bad statistics used, or that's only high level characters or whatever. Like, here's an example, right? We were talking about Detonate Dead as a league starter, and I mentioned in conversation it's going to be pretty popular for reasons, and someone goes and looks up Detonate Dead on PoE.ninja and sees that at the top of the ladder it's not really that popular.
To znamená, že neopravujou ani nějaký ty životy nějakého toho spektra, jo. To je asi ten bug, o kterém říkali, že o něm vědějí, ale že to neopravujou, aby tím nenerfli něco jiného. Takže Explosive Arrow Ballista, to bude začínat asi hodně v softcore.
Fixed a few specific things like certain influence types being too strong, but generally speaking, this isn't path of nerfs for the Atlas tree either. Maybe for the old stuff, but that's pretty obvious.
It sounded like you might have touched on my question there, my follow-up question, which is about the balance between Exarch and Eater of Worlds influence. In particular, it seemed like one was significantly better than the other.
Yeah, the patch notes are coming out just after this chat, so people will be able to see what we've changed. Our goal was to make Exarch as valuable as Eater, so hopefully we've managed to achieve that.
Takže budou patch noty se změnama. To tam nepsali totiž.
Some of my following questions. We're getting keystones, and you mentioned ambitious plans to keep expanding the endgame until PoE 2. Does this mean that we will see Atlas masteries and cluster jewels for the Atlas tree and so on?
We have not actually had an internal discussion that's brought up masteries and cluster jewels. Aside from when you showed me a draft of some of these questions and I asked the team what their thoughts were. That was the first time we actually discussed the concept of masteries and cluster jewels for the Atlas. So the intention is that we come up with things that make sense for it being an Atlas, which could be masteries and cluster jewels. Maybe those are great tools, right? But we'd have to actually work it out based on what the Atlas needs at the time.
I could see masteries. The cost of jewels one was like I kind of added it as a joke. I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. But then again, I don't know. I feel like it could happen.
Myslím si, že je špatně, aby tam byly craftovatelné věci, protože tím to bude rich get richer. Že čím lepší ten cluster jewel si můžete koupit, tím víc potom budete dostávat odměn zpátky. Myslím si, že tam by to byla extrémně špatně. Ale ty mastery úplně klidně.
And then they'll be like, I guess I'm done now, I've done my stuff, got my character finished. And the more stuff we can make it really clear of, actually, if you do this thing, you could get this reward. Like the challenges, for example, or these Uber Pinnacle fights. The more stuff we can dangle in front of you, the more time you will play. And maybe the more time you play, the more stuff you buy. And so this is like a business plan of give people more game. And that means more player agency, more rewards, more content. We have a plan for actual in-game content we're going to roll out. And you'll see it in coming expansions. Like our goal is that we never have a live stream where we just say, oh yeah, the end game's fine, we left it how it is. Our goal is basically end game stuff, just accelerate, push, until PoE 2 comes out.
Well, the idea of like you guys do a live stream, you're like, didn't do anything.
Yeah. Remember how people liked the no character balance? We also did no content. So here's a league reset, new ladder, 8-second live stream. No, there's going to be a lot of stuff. And to be honest, we're really excited that we get to work on the end game every league. Because previously we kind of had this policy of just touch it once a year and touch it in a big way. And it kind of did feel stale. And if you were to ask me what one of our biggest mistakes was we always come out with leagues that at least I find compelling, and you know they're generally pretty good. But when we leave the end game alone, people get to the end game, they've played the league, and then it's kind of just on faith that they keep playing, you know, having some fun, but there isn't new stuff to do necessarily. So that's why we want to make sure there is new stuff to do when you get to the end for each of your characters all the time going forward.
I think it's been a huge reason for PoE's success. I'm excited to see a more consistent role of endgame changes. Especially, like, I think it gives the fact that PoE 2 is coming, we have space because we know, like, hey, the like early game experience is changing in a big way soon, so we can't just focus on the end game.
Nepřepracovali akt 3.
We have a question from a lot of people in chat.
A nebo to bude v patch notech, ale já to
touched on a little bit, but with changes to the Atlas trees and, like, for example, the monsters gain more life one, that would give builds like Detonate Dead a big buff. So has this been taken into consideration at all?
That's a good point. That specific point wasn't discussed directly, but we do understand that yes, the tree has changed, and that will change what builds you want to play, but they will work the way you expect, which is the key thing, right? Like, we're not saying the right build for 317 is the right build for 318. The goal is that people have to think and pick their build. There's new challenges that are very hard. There's new pinnacle bosses that are very hard. The high Sentinel content where you can juice up these map bosses to be very hard is also very hard. Your 317 builds may not be the right ones. But if you take a 317 build guide, it will function. There is no hidden nerf that prevents it from doing so. And there may be incidental stuff that goes much further than just the fact that monsters can get more life if you spec a keystone and that makes your detonate deads better. It does scale DD, right? Yeah, okay, just checking that. But the builds from last time will work is the important part. We are not saying that the best build from last time is the best build from this time. So you must think before picking your build, but you can trust the build guides you read. And if there's something that's exciting, then play that one.
That is an interesting, like, refreshing kind of. I don't know. It feels refreshing this time around.
We'll break stuff in the future. Like, we want a new meta in the future. We are not saying the builds stay this way forever. Yeah. However, this time they do, and maybe if people like that,
zajímá mě passive tree a keystony na oltáře. Hodně mě to zajímá.
Because I don't know, like, I feel like I should be always hungering for the new changes to be excited about, but I don't know, I feel like...
Co to je za skill, to je Blazing Salvo?
Relieved a little bit that there's not like a bunch of balance changes this time. So maybe it's like an every now and then thing, it does seem right, but I guess we'll see how it feels after actually playing League. So those keystones that change the health and life, do they affect pinnacle bosses? Or just maps?
They affect monsters in your maps, I believe. How does this technically work?
Yeah, so that terminology typically just refers to the maps on the Atlas and Pinnacle one.
Right. So yeah, in case Andrew wasn't loud, the maps on your Atlas are the ones affected by your Atlas tree when it's worded like that, and the Pinnacle bosses are typically not maps on the Atlas.
So the things that do affect Pinnacle bosses will probably refer to them specifically.
Yeah, there is like one keystone per fight, which is pretty clear that it makes it really hard. Oh, and here's the thing, by the way, random rant. what we learned from the Maelstrom of Chaos back in closed beta was that you have to have a cost for accessing in-game content. The reason why we made the map system where it consumes the map is so that there's a cost to trying. If you want to try a red tier map, it's going to cost you a lot, right? A whole red tier map. And the reason for this is because we found that players would play the hardest content of the game and then die and then be very angry and complain and quit. So typically, if you have high content, you have to gate it behind it being hard to get to, like the simulacrum or blah blah blah. Problem is, here, the absolute hardest content is gated behind clicking a keystone. So there are people who are going to play the Uber fights who probably can't complete them. So it's not the case that you should allocate the keystone in order to have a normal Path of Exile experience. This is going to kill you, right? Like, you have to be really good at the normal Uber fight, the normal Pinnacle fights, before it's worth allocating that keystone. So just get your regrets ready.
A Seru se si celkem věřím. Řekl bych, že Shaper bych taky mohl dát.
Put like one of those warning labels on it. You have to tear off first before you get.
Uber Elder nevím. Když tam bude bullet hell, tak to asi nedám. Maven bych možná mohl dát.
We've had long, non-constructive arguments internally about whether this is technically Path of Exile's hardest content, where the answer is, of course it is, look at how hard it is. Or I've come up with a contrived example of some other stuff. But as an example, you know the Theod, for example, where it's got lots of bosses. It's probably on par with that, or a bit above, or a bit below, depending on the individual fight. But that's kind of the scale here. You don't just walk into that fight expecting it to be straightforward. And so these are certainly the hardest, like, solo boss fights with just, like, you know, 1 or 2 bosses in them.
Speaking of hard content, are the monsters from the new influence type seeing any changes? In particular, springing to my mind is the tentacle miscreations that appear, about 80 of them at the same time, and start shooting me all at the same time with tracking, heat-seeking bullets.
So we nerfed the Burning Ground from one of the Eto World's Alter mods that affects influence monsters. It was like a Burning Ground on death that's scale based on attack damage, and certain monsters had really high attack damage, so they had off the charts Burning Ground. That's been fixed. And we'll keep the tentacle miscreations as they are for you, Ziggy.
No. Another Ziggy under the bus moment. Great, thanks. Okay. Oh no!
Na ty oltáře jsem
10-minute warnings. Alright, let's go. So Arch Nemesis modifiers are replacing old Nemesis and Bloodline modifiers. It had some really punitive and scary mechanics, like disabling leech and combos that led to truly unkillable nightmares. I made a monster where I invited like the most OP people we could find into the map, and they couldn't kill it. However, we had control over making these monsters every time, but now it's random. And I know a lot of the time it's
se neusmívá Chris, takže ho taky trápí, vidíte to?
Still, I need reassurance, Chris. I'm very scared.
So there's a lot of balance changes for the Arch Nemesis mods, and most of them are taking things that make sense in the context of Arch Nemesis and that don't make sense in the core game and fixing it. So for example, in Arch Nemesis, you're always fighting just one monster, and it's one that you can control what's on it, so you can pick. But in the core game, it could be several monsters with a mod near you. Like maybe you've got a magic pack, or maybe you've just hit multiple rares near each other. And so
znamená to, že už nebude aura stekování, chápu to dobře?
And of course that's a problem if there's just monsters all over the place that are doing like entirely freeze or entirely stuns on you. And so that stuff is being fixed. And like the Ice Prison mod disabled travel skills, whereas now it doesn't, because you kind of can't control when you run into it. So
ten Ice Prison mod je takovej odpad, se poběžíte někam v mapě a najednou vás něco zastaví. To nebude dobrý.
Like, you know, not related to Arch Nemesis in particular, but certainly affects it. The other thing is that in Arch Nemesis, each mod had a multiplicative life bonus, and so there were some very, very, very high life rares. But when we've integrated it into the core game, they don't have such a bonus. Like we've kept the monster magic and rare life about the same as it was before, and it doesn't come from their mods. But to be clear, that doesn't mean that the rare monsters are easy. They were too easy before, we feel. They didn't, like, the basic idea is you play Path of Exile, you can kind of zone out the monsters, and it's fun, you have your power trip and everything's good. And then you run into occasionally a certain combination of rare mods that causes your character to have to pause and maybe do a different strategy. And that's how it's meant to be, that generally rare monsters are fine for you to kill, and sometimes they're hard. And people can try to argue they don't want a game where sometimes it gets hard, but the game we're making is one where sometimes it's hard, and that's done through rare monster mods, plus like things like act bosses and stuff that we can custom design. You could use the Diablo 2 example of like multiple shot lightning enchanted monsters, right? You can kill most of the rares and then you run into one of those and you have to be very careful, at least back in the good old days. So we do have combinations here that are hard, and we feel that something like turning off leech for a specific monster is not the end of the world. There are other ways of having to recover life, and if this is a game where you cannot be permanently leeching and occasionally you need another way of getting life, we don't feel that that is too bad. But we will make sure that things that are
Mně tam nejde o life leech, mě tam jde o mana leech, jo?
Actually, to clarify, there isn't a long list of changes. There's a lot of changes, but the patch notes basically just said we changed a bunch of stuff. It was getting completely out of hand to document it all, and it doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect your build a lot, so we only covered important points. But
kdyby tam udělali, nemůžete líčovat live, ale manuel, nebo kdyby to řekli, třeba můžete líčovat jenom polovinu, to by šlo, ale ten jako no mana líč může být problém.
No, but we may have made some awakened exceptional support gems and hidden them away behind really hard bosses that no one's actually going to be able to kill and has a very rare chance of dropping them.
I love awakened exceptional support gems. It's perfect. Yeah. It reminds me of some of the really long old support gem names we had. Hopefully we get back to those. Those halcyon days of 18-word long support gem names. Okie dokie. Do we have any... Oh, yes. This was the question about hard mode. We're circling back to that
No, co ten hard mode?
Do we have any update on the previously teased hard mode?
Hard mode is still being worked on, but it is a second priority. And what that means is, if a league is looking great and everything is fine and we're going to release it on schedule at high quality and everything's perfect, we work on hard mode. And if it is not going to be fine and we need to work on the league, we will of course 100% do that. So in no way are we letting hard mode stuff sacrifice any actual work from the core game. And this has meant that in some 3-month periods we just haven't touched it. And it's also tricky because it requires time from a lot of senior people, right? Like, Mark, for example, who is knee deep in like complicated Path of Exile 2 stuff right now, has to be dragged out of that to work on hard mode for bits and pieces that he needs to work on. It's tricky to find time. So we do have a schedule, and tentatively speaking, I would like to see it released by the end of the year. We want to make sure we do it right, of course, but that's what we're looking for. And because it's announced, we can be open with this, right? Like, it's not a secret. There's not going to be a big, like, there won't be a live stream where we say, surprise, hard mode's ready. It'll be the case of, remember that thing you've been testing for a while? Well, that's getting formally released with some prizes for a competition or whatever. So we will be very open about it.
Does that mean there might be some testing period before then? Maybe.
I think so, but not quite soon. Like, I'm thinking maybe a test in 3 months, maybe release in 6, right? But I'm usually wrong, so double or triple or half those numbers, we'll see.
All right. I'd like to discuss visual clarity in Path of Exile if we can for a little bit. So over the years, Path of Exile has become quite good looking, especially compared to some of those earlier screenshots and videos that are still floating around.
Thank you.
It especially feels that way when you're like leveling in early end game progression. During these times, like the monsters, the player, and the ability all work really well together to both communicate like the gameplay that the game has, but also the game world and the setting and the feeling and all that sort of stuff. However, when Path of Exile scales up, which it does, it scales up a lot these days.
Já si myslím, že koncem příštího roku.
Like a colorful blur where both like gameplay understanding is lost and also aesthetics are lost. Is this what are your thoughts in general on visual clarity in Path of Exile currently, and is there any plans on how you might?
Divil bych se, kdyby to bylo dřív než koncem příštího roku. Možná plus rok. Ale řekl bych, že to nejpravděpodobnější.
And the most extreme thing we could do would be to pause all other development and just sit there improving visual clarity for ages on every existing thing. And we actually do kind of have the ability to do that in the form of Path of Exile 2, because pretty much everything's getting redone. And so because they've learned all the lessons from 15 years of work on Path of Exile 1, they can make sure to design stuff in a way where when it scales up, it doesn't lose visual clarity when stacked with other stuff. And so the PoE 2 team, who are working on the version we're all going to eventually be playing in a few years, they know this and are working for it. So the question is, what are we doing for PoE 1? And any new stuff we make involving effects, we try very hard to make sure it has visual clarity. I hope you will find that when you're playing Sentinel, that the Sentinel effects are both relatively subtle but clear as to what is tagged and what rewards they're giving, and they stack with other things appropriately. Let us know if you feel that needs work. We make sure that new stuff that we make works well from a visual clarity point of view, and we do invest occasionally a bit of work in making sure that certain other old effects that are terrible from a visual clarity point of view are improved. But to be honest, a lot of the old graphics are mostly thrown away when PoE 2 comes out and replaces a lot of stuff. So, and by that I mean skills and so on. Like the campaign, yes, that will exist, but the campaign doesn't have visual clarity problems, and we will be playing with Path of Exile 2 skills on our Path of Exile 1 characters in the future.
Yeah, I think that's probably the problem. Like, a lot of the new stuff has been really good, but it kind of gets lost in the background of all the old stuff that really overwhelms.
Teďko mě napadlo, jestli můžete takovýma těma syntezátorama, nebo jak tomu říkají, se syntetizovat dva mirrornutý předměty.
Look forward to
Protože
seeing
pokud by
more,
protože oni
progress
říkali,
on
že
that.
to
A lot of
můžete
people
udělat
have
z
been
korapnutých
asking about
předmětů,
Loot 2.0 as
což je
well.
zajímavý.
I know we've had like little testers or little
A pokud by to
tastes
šlo i
of
z
some of that
mirrornutých, tak
change.
byste měli jeden
Let's see.
zdrojový předmět.
Where
Ten
are we
byste
at in terms of, like,
mirorovali,
Loot 2.0?
There's a lot of axes.
Jenom by vás to
right?
stalo hodně
So
mirorů.
the first thing
A ty
is,
mirornutý
hard
kopie
mode
byste
is going to
pomohli
be good for
syntetizovat,
people
dokud
who
vám
really
nevzniklo
want
to,
no
co
clutter.
chcete.
Like if they really just want it so that items are special when they find each one, they go play that.
Dřív než
It's kind
Diablo
of
4,
perfect.
myslím, že s
Second
tím
thing
se
is,
počítá.
we have been doing things like reducing the number of times you find currency item and increasing the stack sizes, basically working towards decluttering. We also had some experimentative changes related to decluttering, which were deployed months ago that no one has noticed yet, which is good. That means that it hasn't had an effect on the actual economy, and it hasn't had an effect on item drops to the point where people will notice, and we'll gradually continue to tweak that. It's mostly in the form of culling items that would never be picked up. And so, the better we get at that, the better it is. I just don't want players to feel that we're culling items that are valuable to them, because we're really trying very hard not to. And the basic goal is, I know we're going over time, but at the end of the day, there are two ways to declutter, right? Way number one is to leave the spam of rares and uniques that people are used to, right? This really rewarding thing where there's quite a lot of item dilution. Leave that in place because people like it, and to reduce clutter of other things, in which case at the end of the day, it's a big pile of yellow items on the ground. And I think we'd be lynched if we did a solution other than that, or to actually solve itemization issues with the game and say, look, rares should be special, blah blah blah. And that's what hard mode's for, right? We get it. A lot of people like the reward spam, and so because of hard mode, there will be a way where rewards are very, very, very precious, and they can play there if they want, in my opinion, superior experience. But baseline PoE will probably still not have substantial drop nerfs, at least during PoE 1. And then of course with PoE 2, we can look at what makes sense, knowing what players like, but also knowing how that game works.
Awesome. Well, I've been giving the time warning quite aggressively, but just kidding. Thank you very much, Chris, for spending some time with us and answering some questions today. I'd appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks
Thanks for hosting.
suggesting stuff. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.
Very much.
That's your release.
To je konec. Tím pádem na YouTube je teďko konec tohoto videa, ale není to všechno, co se týká videí ohledně začátku ligy. Takže pokud nejste v playlistu, podívejte se na YouTube v popisu videa a tam bude odkaz na celý playlist o uvedení nebo o této Sentinelize. Klikněte na to a budete se moct podívat i na další videa v řadě, na který se jdu pustit teďko.